I want peace through strength.
I'll lead an effective strategy to mobilize true international effort to pressure.
Comes to foreign affairs, only 31% think President Biden's policies would increase peace and stability, compared to 47% for Trump.
Let's see which strategy works better: peace through strength or true internal under pressure.
Mr. Message to Iran in this moment.
Don't. True international effort to pressure.
Iran launched more than 300 cruise missiles, ballistic missiles and drones toward Israel, raising concerns about broader conflict in the Middle East 6 months after Hamas attacked Israel. Israeli, American and other allied forces intercepted dozens of drones and the majority of missiles before they reached Israeli territory, officials said. It's the first time Iran has directly attacked Israel from Iranian territory.
The root of all evil here is Iran. There is no Hamas without Iran. 93% of their budget comes from the Iranian Ayatollah. Hezbollah is a complete subsidiary of the Iranian Ayatollah. So at the end of the day, the Houthis survive on money from the Ayatollah.
So now we learned Tehran's going to get richer. Lindsey Graham sounding the alarm. Administration greenlights roughly $10 billion for Iran. State Department insists it's only for humanitarian aid. Sounds familiar, does it not? Jillian Turner's following the money from the State Department to explain this. Jillian.
Good morning to you, Bill. So the Biden administration is renewing what is called a sanctions waiver. It's going to allow the Iranian regime imminently to access $10 billion in frozen funds that are being held inside Iraq. This is a decision that comes as Iranian-backed forces are continually attacking U.S. forces inside the Middle East. Now, despite, I think a total, we're looking at 56 strikes now in 29 days, State Department officials insist they are unconcerned about the prospect of that money being used to fund terrorists.
I bear responsibility for fundamentally all that's happened.
کار نیست صرفاً این یک خط مشیه.
The Iranian government masks a corrupt dictatorship behind the false guise of a democracy. It has turned a wealthy country with a rich history and culture into an economically depleted rogue state whose chief exports are violence, bloodshed, and chaos. The longest suffering victims of Iran's leaders are, in fact, its own people. Rather than use its resources to improve Iranian lives, its oil profits go to fund Hezbollah and other terrorists that kill innocent Muslims and attack their peaceful Arab and Israeli neighbors. Peace and stability cannot prevail in the Middle East as long as Iran continues to foment violence, unrest, hatred, and war. The civilized world must send a clear and unified message to the Iranian regime. Your campaign of terror, murder, mayhem will not be tolerated any longer. It will not be allowed to go forward. U.S. armed forces are stronger than ever before. Our missiles are big, powerful, accurate, lethal, and fast. Under construction are many hypersonic missiles. The fact that we have this great military and equipment, however, does not mean we have to use it. We do not want to use it. American strength, both military and economic, is the best deterrent. Finally, to the people and leaders of Iran, we want you to have a future, and a great future, one that you deserve, one of prosperity at home and harmony with the nations of the world. The United States is ready to embrace peace with all who seek it. As president, my highest and most solemn duty is the defense of our nation and its citizens. Last night, at my direction, the United States military successfully executed a flawless precision strike that killed the #1 terrorist anywhere in the world, Qasem Soleimani. Just recently, Soleimani led the brutal repression of protesters in Iran, where more than 1,000 innocent civilians were tortured and killed by their own government. We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war. I have deep respect for the Iranian people. They are a remarkable people with an incredible heritage and unlimited potential. We do not seek regime change. However, the Iranian regime's aggression in the region, including the use of proxy fighters to destabilize its neighbors, must end, and it must end now. The future belongs to the people of Iran, those who seek peaceful coexistence and cooperation, not the terrorist warlords who plunder their nation to finance bloodshed abroad. The world is a safer place without these monsters. America will always pursue the interests of good people, great souls, while seeking peace, harmony, and friendship with all of the nations of the world.
From Tehran to Isfahan to Hamadan, Iranians defied their government and called for its end. In Tehran, crowds shouted for Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, to step down. This crowd chanted, "Dictator, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, you are our ISIS." The defiance comes just days after Iran buried its #2 leader, Qasem Soleimani. Now his posters are being torn down in the streets and taken down from walls. At Amir Kabir University in Tehran, hundreds of students refused to step on the American and Israeli flags and shouted at those who did. President Trump tweeted directly to the leaders of Iran in both Farsi and English. To the leaders of Iran, do not kill your protesters. Thousands have already been killed or imprisoned by you, and the world is watching. More importantly, the USA is watching. Middle East expert Wally Ferris tweeted that Trump's message was the equivalent of President Ronald Reagan telling Gorbachev to tear down this wall. But the protesters risked their lives. These videos show some people have been shot during these protests. A few months ago, Iranian authorities killed 1,500 Iranians who protested.
The Iranian populace is very much dissatisfied with the Iranian regime, saying, how come you are ignoring the 1,500 that died, but yet you're mourning this individual, a person who probably had direct involvement in killing those 1,500.
Last month, I also took an action endorsed unanimously by the U.S. Senate just months before. I recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Shortly afterwards, dozens of countries voted in the United Nations General Assembly against America's sovereign right to make this decision. In 2016, American taxpayers generously sent those same countries more than $20 billion in aid. That is why tonight I am asking Congress to pass legislation to help ensure American foreign assistance dollars always serve American interests and only go to friends of America, not enemies of America.
the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and His Highness, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the United Arab Emirates, will sign a treaty of peace, diplomatic relations, and full normalization. They will each sign 3 copies, one in English, Hebrew, and Arabic. We kindly ask that all guests remain seated for the signing of the documents.
Moving now to Israel, where Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said he does not support a U.S. plan to reopen a Palestinian consulate in Jerusalem. The U.S. recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel back in 2017 and moved its embassy there the following year. A consulate for Palestinian affairs was put under the authority of the embassy. Critics say reopening the consulate in Jerusalem would be a step towards dividing the city.
There's so much more we agree upon with our American friends than we disagree upon, but indeed, our position is, and it was presented very clearly and openly to our American friends, that there's no room for another American consulate in Jerusalem.
For Palestine, Biden's visit is an opportunity. The former president, Donald Trump, openly sided with Israel. He even cut down funding for Palestine. Compared to that, Joe Biden is more sympathetic. Today, he reaffirmed his support for the two-state solution.
Now, as President of the United States, my commitment to that goal of a two-state solution has not changed in all these years. Two states along the 1967 lines were mutually agreed to swaps remain the best way to achieve equal measure of security, prosperity, freedom, and democracy for the Palestinians as well as Israelis.
President Abbas has seen the writing on the wall. The new generation of Arab leaders is not focused on Palestine. They're focused on a post-oil future. They are focused on countering Iran. And for that, the Arab world needs Israel. Even Joe Biden realizes this.
Also mentioned in this deal is Israel. What would it take for you to agree to normalize relations with Israel?
Well, there is approach from President Biden administration to get to that point. For us, the Palestinian issue is very important. We need to solve that part, and we have a good negotiations continue.
There were reports that you had suspended talks.
No, that's not true.
Not true. So you think, if you were to characterize it, are you close?
Every day we get closer. It seems it's for the first time real one, serious. We're gonna see how it goes.
Can you make a deal with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? Is that somebody you can deal with?
Well, in Saudi Arabia policy, we don't interfere of who's running each country, who's there. We work with him. Now we don't have a relation with Israel, but if Biden administration succeeded to make, I believe, the biggest historical deal since the end of the Cold War, then we're going to start a relationship, and that relationship going to be continuous regardless of who's running Israel. So
the Abraham Accords heralded the dawn of a new age of peace. But I believe that we are at the cusp of an even more dramatic breakthrough, an historic peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Such a peace will go a long way to ending the Arab-Israeli conflict. It will encourage other Arab states to normalize their relations with Israel. Now look at what happens when we make peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel. The whole Middle East changes. We tear down the walls of enmity. We bring the possibility of prosperity and peace to this entire region. 2 days ago, I discussed this vision of peace with President Biden. We share the same optimism for what can be achieved.
The recent terrorist assault on the people of this nation has left a deep, deep wound. More than 1,300 innocent Israelis killed, including at least 31 American citizens by the terrorist group Hamas. Hundreds of young people at a music festival The festival was for peace, gunned down as they ran for their lives. Scores of innocents, from infants to elderly grandparents, Israelis and Americans, taken hostage. Children slaughtered, babies slaughtered, entire families massacred. Rape, beheadings, bodies burned alive. Hamas committed atrocities that recall the worst ravages of ISIS, unleashing pure, unadulterated evil upon the world.
President Biden would have achieved that historic peace agreement if he had simply continued his predecessor's militant policy against Iran's religious theocracy and Islamic terrorism. Instead, he chose to appease Iran and its proxies, Hezbollah, Houthis, and Hamas, enemies of Israel and the Saudis, and by feeding this beast, Biden's policies indirectly enabled the October 7th terrorist attacks and the collapse of the Saudi-Israel peace deal. Well done, Mr. President. Well done.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. He has been very threatening beyond a normal statement.
Mr. Trump tweets, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un just stated that the nuclear button is on his desk at all times. Will someone from his depleted and food-starved regime please inform him that I too have a nuclear button, but it is a much bigger and more powerful one than his, and my button works.
Now North Korea's reckless pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles threatens the entire world with unthinkable loss of human life. It is an outrage that some nations would not only trade with such a regime, but would arm, supply, and financially support a country that imperils the world with nuclear conflict. No nation on earth has an interest in seeing this band of criminals arm itself with nuclear weapons and missiles. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary. My friend.
반갑습니다. Good to see you again. 이런 데서 각하를 만나게 될 줄 생각 못했습니다. I've never expected to meet you at this place.
That's good. It's my honor. Would you like me to step across?
각하께서 한 발자국 건너시면 사상 처음으로 우리 땅을 밟으시는 미국 대통령이 되십니다.
If Your Excellency take a step forward,
you will be the first U.S. president to cross the border.
I'd be very proud to do that. Okay, let's do it. Come on. I want peace through strength.
It seems there's praise all round in North Korea after its latest test of an intercontinental ballistic missile. State media reports leader Kim Jong-un personally guided the launch of the Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missile on Wednesday, which flew for 74 minutes before crashing down in the waters near Japan. The longest flight ever carried out by this ICBM. It was a solid fuel missile. It's been called the North's most powerful nuclear weapon, but it's unclear if it could actually deliver a nuclear payload.
A menacing milestone for North Korea's missile program. Pyongyang's latest ICBM launch breaking its own record for the longest ever missile flight. A staggering 74 minutes, hurtling high above the Earth at supersonic speed, hitting 6,000 kilometers before splashing down in the sea. The massive missile's potential striking range, the entire U.S. mainland and most of the world. Pyongyang's most provocative launch in months, coinciding with this NATO summit in Lithuania, quickly condemned by Japan as an unacceptable threat to regional stability.
Nuclear attack by North Korea against the United States or its allies or partisans or partners is unacceptable and will result in the end of whatever regime were to take such an action.
Why did you soften the GOP platform on Ukraine?
I wasn't involved in that. Honestly, I was not involved. Yeah, I was not involved in that. I'd like to, I'd have to take a look at it, but I was not involved.
Do you know what they did?
They softened it, I heard, but I was not involved.
They took away the part of the platform calling for provision of lethal weapons to Ukraine to defend themselves. Why is that a good idea?
Look, you know, I have my own ideas. He's not going into Ukraine, okay? Just so you understand. He's not going to go into Ukraine. All right, you can mark it down, you can put it down, you can take it anywhere you want.
Well, he's already there, isn't he?
Okay, well, he's there in a certain way, but I'm not there. You have Obama there. And frankly, that whole part of the world is a mess under Obama, with all the strength that you're talking about and all of the power of NATO and all of this. In the meantime, he's going away. He takes Crimea. He's sort of, I mean...
But you said you might recognize that.
I'm going to take a look at it. But, you know, the people of Crimea, from what I've heard, would rather be with Russia than where they were. And you have to look at that also. Now, that was under, just so you understand, that was done under Obama's administration. And as far as Ukraine is concerned, it's a mess. And that's under the Obama's administration with his strong ties to NATO. So with all of these strong ties to NATO, Ukraine is a mess. Crimea has been taken. Don't blame Donald Trump for that.
We urge Russia to cease its destabilizing activities in Ukraine and elsewhere, and its support for hostile regimes, including Syria and Iran, and to instead join the community of responsible nations in our fight against common enemies and in defense of civilization itself. Americans, Poles, and nations of Europe value individual freedom and sovereignty. We must work together to confront forces, whether they come from inside or out, from the South or the East, that threaten over time to undermine these values and to erase the bonds of culture, faith, and tradition.
Mr. President, I'll give this ball to you, and now the ball is in your court.
Always a nuclear power. It's like they're afraid of him. You know, he was a friend of mine. I got along great with him. I say, Vladimir, if you do it, we're hitting Moscow. I said, we're going to hit Moscow. And he sort of believed me, like 5%, 10%. That's all you need. He never did it during my time, John, you know.
No.
They're all talking about it.
No, it's
Why
funny.
Why did he do this during the last 4 years? Because he knew he couldn't.
It's funny how Xi didn't bother you either.
Now, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has endorsed, believe it or not, Joe Biden to win the next US presidential election.
Yes, asked who he thought would be better for Russia, Putin replied, Biden. He's more experienced, a predictable person, and a politician of the old school.
He would much rather deal with somebody who is not as strong, and that is President Biden. It's just plain and simple, you know, and it's hard to actually witness a man who's falling into cognitive decline, and I think Putin sees that. And so Putin and Trump probably have more in common than we think, because Trump has actually praised him, not once, not twice, but numerous times. And even Nikki Haley, once again, she put out a Valentine's Day card today with 4 different dictators that Trump has praised.
Well, that's what's so interesting. It does seem to be a change in tack, because Vladimir Putin in 2016 was describing Mr. Trump as outstanding and talented. Now he's endorsing Joe Biden instead.
Dealing with somebody like Trump is obviously more difficult than dealing with Biden. The fact that he called him predictable, I don't feel very confident or comfortable about that statement. I would actually prefer our president to keep people on their toes.
Well, listen, it is profoundly dangerous. There are over 100,000 Russian troops that are massed on the Ukrainian border. This weekend, the Biden administration declassified their own assessment that an invasion is imminent, and that it could come as early as January or February of next year. And candidly, the administration is trying to prepare everyone for the very substantial possibility of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. The thing to understand, this is Joe Biden's fault. It's Joe Biden's fault for two reasons. Number one, you mentioned just a minute ago, the disaster of Afghanistan, the weakness that Biden showed surrendering to the Taliban. Every enemy of America took a measure of the man in the Oval Office, and that same surrender that we've seen to the Taliban, the rest of the enemies of America were emboldened by that surrender. But secondly, Biden very specifically surrendered to Putin on Nord Stream 2. Now, why does Nord Stream 2 matter? Nord Stream 2 is a pipeline that Russia is building to go directly from Russia to Germany. They're doing it because they want to bypass Ukraine. In 2014, Putin invaded Ukraine, invaded Crimea, but didn't continue to invade the rest of the country, didn't go all the way to Kiev. Why? Because right now the Russian natural gas goes through Ukraine, through Ukrainian energy infrastructure to get to Europe. And if they had invaded Ukraine, the Ukrainians could have destroyed that pipeline and cut off their ability to get to market. So Nord Stream 2 is all about enabling Russia to cut Ukraine out of the transit loop in order for them to march the tanks, drive the tanks into downtown Kiev. In 2019, I authored bipartisan legislation, sanctions on Nord Stream 2, passed both houses of Congress. President Trump signed it into law, and the day that my legislation was signed into law, Putin stopped construction of the pipeline. It lay dormant for over a year until Joe Biden got elected.
Why would he do that?
Because they want to make nice to Germany. The Biden foreign policy team, you just showed Jake Sullivan. I've joked that their foreign policy team sleeps with votive candles of Angela Merkel under their beds. And Merkel really wants this pipeline. But the timing is stunning. Biden was sworn into office on January 20th, 2021. Putin began building the pipeline again on January 24th, 2021, 4 days after Biden was sworn into office. Biden waived the sanctions that I had authored, that we had imposed on Nord Stream 2, waived it. At the time he waived it this summer, both Ukraine and Poland said publicly that by waiving the sanctions, Biden was creating a military threat to Ukraine from Russia. And let me tell you, Harris, Biden could stop this today if he simply revokes the sanctions, revokes the waiver, and imposes sanctions. And he's unwilling to do so. If we see tanks in the streets of Kiev, it will be because Joe Biden surrendered to Putin.
I have no doubt that President Putin made his decision to ruthlessly attack Ukraine only after watching the pathetic withdrawal from Afghanistan. Yesterday, reporters asked me if I thought President Putin was smart. I said, of course he's smart, to which I was greeted with, oh, that's such a terrible thing to say. The problem is not that Putin is smart, which of course he's smart, but the real problem is that our leaders are dumb. Putin is playing Biden like a drum, and it's not a pretty thing as somebody that loves our country to watch. Just not a pretty thing to watch.